Retro design with extremely modern internals is basically the catchphrase for what the K17 actually is. This is a DAC amp streamer, and I think it's the flagship for Fio right now. And for full transparency, I think it's the best Fio that I've personally listened to. Today, I'm going to tell you about some of the specifications and the sound performance compared to some other flagship DAC and amplifiers. The DAC is weird. It's actually a combination of an AKM AK4191 and an AK4499EX. I'm not really sure why this is a combination DAC or if this actually has any tangible benefits to sound, but that is what they're using. Despite the more minimalistic exterior, there are quite a lot of features on this, and one of them is that this has the option for EQ. Not only with their custom set profiles, but with their EQ website, you can upload about 10 different EQs to this thing. And you can get them pretty in depth, and a little bit more in depth than an amplifier that we just looked at, the JDS Labs Element 4, though this does come in at a much higher price, being just under about $1,000. Now for that money, you do get a very solid and well-built piece of equipment. It honestly feels nicer built than most DAC amps these days, but it doesn't quite bridge the gap into ultra high-end build quality for brands like Woo Audio, for example. So while the build quality is good and it feels nice, it may not feel as premium as the highest end equipment you might be used to. This feels very on par with the build quality of a brand like Topping. What's interesting is what they chose to put on physical dials and what they chose to put in the menu settings. And there are some things where, for example, it says EQ here on kind of the main homepage. I kind of wish you could just click on that and it would go to the EQ, but instead you have to swipe, go to the equalizer section, scroll over to the EQ you want, and then it will finally implement that EQ. So I kind of wish you could either customize or have better access from the homepage, since that's the one you're looking at 99% of the time. In terms of some software features that this has, it has an equalizer, it's got filters and other options for like RGB and your color theme, even though you only have an option between this orange and sort of a black and white look. So pretty limited there. One notable part about the build, if you have 4-pin XLR cables that are super nice, and let's say they have a design on what would normally be the top for most amplifiers, the outputs here in the front are actually inverted. So the 4-pin is actually flipped upside down. So you have to turn the cable 180 degrees from what you're used to plugging in on 99% of the other balanced amplifiers. When it comes to inputs and outputs, there are so many options. A quick look at the back and you can see that you have options galore, including up to 3 USB inputs if you include the one in the front. There's also LAN, optical, coaxial, 4.4, and Bluetooth. And then of course you have the streaming functionality. To be honest, I'm personally just not a streamer guy. And the reason why is because if I'm out and about, I'm using wireless headphones. Just that's gonna be what it is. And if I'm at home, I'm just gonna interface with the computer, and I'm not really gonna be using this streamer functionality because it's much faster, more efficient, and I'm usually already there at the PC. When it comes to power, this also has quite a bit. Into 32 ohms, it's about 4 watts, and it puts out about 48 volt peak to peak. So it's got tons of power, but it's not the most power you can buy, but I think it's across that threshold of what you need. I can run Sysvara Unveileds on this, no problem, without issue. It's got tons of headroom, just like a lot of the other leading DAC amps right now. This also comes with remote function, which can basically cover a lot of what you would use, though not everything, but it gives you a general use case. You can change things like EQ and your volume settings and modes and stuff like that. Now, I think Fio is getting really good in multiple areas right now. And I think we've been seeing it for a few years now, but it's becoming quite clear that the gap difference between these kind of budget brands and really high-end brands, if it's not already closed, it's getting super, super close. And in some cases, except for build quality of ultra high-end stuff, you're starting to see features that are just more plentiful on budget kind of brands like this than some hi-fi brands. They just can't keep up in terms of technology. And you're also starting to see that gap close a lot in terms of sound quality. So this to me is hitting a pretty nice detail threshold where I don't feel like I'm gonna extract a whole lot more detail regardless of how much higher I go in price. It's also got enough power to run just about any headphone, and it's got basically enough options to fit in basically anyone's setup. And so you're starting to see not very many reasons to really go much higher other than just general user tangible experience, for example. I think to explain the sound quality, I think the best way to do that right now is to compare it to something. So the DX9. The DX9 I consider to be just about technically perfect. It may not be your preference for sound, but I think It's just about as equal and as neutral and as flat of a playing field as you can possibly get for headphones. And I think that it does that very, very well. And I think that the Fio K17 is actually a little bit different, and I think the comparison is kind of interesting. The amp tech is a little different too. The Topping uses their NFCA amplifier modules, and the Fio uses a fully discrete Class AB transistor current amplifier. I would say that one of the most obvious differences is one sounds analog and the other one sounds digital. The DX9 is a more digital, precise sound, and that influences every single aspect, every single song, and every single headphone you listen to. And the Fio is a bit more kind of classic analog sound. The DX9 is a bit better for things like detail and precision, and those come across a bit more obvious, as well as the sound staging placement and the width of everything is a little bit wider. Everything has a bit more depth to it, but it misses some of the more focused kind of vocal impressions that the Fio can deliver. Now the Fio has a lot of detail, and it definitely caps that detail threshold that I would look for in a high-end solid state amp, for example, but it doesn't quite have that last like 1, 2, 3% that the DX9 does. And I think that that rounding or softening is something that I think actually a lot of people are looking for and aren't looking for the exacting sharp precision of the DX9. Now, to be completely fair, I think that the way to get around this is with headphone choice, and this is something that is ignored a lot of times. For example, no matter which amplifier you listen to the Susvara Unveiled on, it's always going to sound sterile and exacting. It's just the sound profile that this headphone offers. No amplifier, even really, really good tube amplifiers, are not really going to change that. You're going to get some level of a more precise, exacting, just really clean sound off of this Susvara Unveiled, no matter what you do. On the other hand, you have a headphone like this Bokeh, which no matter what you plug this into, it's gonna have that really organic, warm, natural sound. Just really, really going to shape every amplifier to funnel into the Bokeh's type of sound signature. Now, when you stack a more organic sounding amplifier with more organic sounding headphone, it becomes even more in that area. And on the opposite end, when you take a cleaner headphone like the Unveiled and stick it with a cleaner amplifier like the DX9, you get even more in that area. So you kind of have to know what your end goals are. But at the same time, I think that your headphone choices are going to influence this area much more than any particular amplifier change that you're gonna make. To wrap up some of the comparisons here, if I'm considering the DX9 to be the reference, right, the flat playing field for everything to compare against, I think that the Fio is not quite there in terms of totality of sound signature, but I can absolutely see it being more of someone's preference. It does have a bit more of a focused sound where the sound doesn't seem as wide and it seems a bit more intense and warmer in your head. Not by a lot, but by a notable margin on a more revealing headphone. But one undeniable thing in this comparison here is that the Fio does have a lot more features. So if you find yourself buying on features and not buying on sound quality, the feature set in the K17 is excellent. But there are undeniable wins with the DX9. I think that on sound quality alone, I think that it still stands a bit ahead if you're paying around this $1,000 price category. I think for my money, I'd be picking the DX9, but that's just to my preference. And on paper, the DX9 is definitely the better amplifier. It's got loads more power, way more headroom. It's got better specifications, but it does lack on those features. So my conclusion is pretty simple. It depends on what you need from your amplifier and what you're looking for. If you can sacrifice a tiny, tiny bit in sound quality for a lot more features, K17 is the obvious choice between these two. And inverse that if you're into more sound quality than anything else. Luckily, these days we're spoiled for choice and really can go with any direction we choose. And I think this is a good reflection point to actually look at how cool it is that we can have amplifiers like this that actually cost as little relative to what they used to as they do. Not only do they have more features than ever before, but they also have cleaner specifications, more power, and better builds, to be honest. The precision of build quality has only gone up through the entire industry lately, and you can see that reflected in the build quality of the K17. All right, guys, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.